Hi and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on maximizing your return on investment from the IBA conference. We're going to give people a couple of minutes to connect and join the session. We had quite a lot of signups, and we'll be looking forward to our discussion today. See lots of familiar faces. Welcome, everyone. I'm joined here by Barbara and Catherine. I'll introduce them to you in a minute. We also have Emma here from our Stellar Events team, taking care of the logistics, always important. So just wondering, who in the audience has actually already attended an IBA conference? Maybe can you add a yes or a no to the chat? And if you want to share where you're from, that would be amazing, because I see we have people from all over the globe in the true spirit of the IBA, an international crowd today. Okay. So we're 3 minutes in. I think we're going to get started. Thank you, Lorenza. So the question was, have you already attended an IBA conference? Anyone, not just last year's or this year's one in Mexico, but anyone? Let us know in the chat with a yes or a no, and also share where you're from. It's just always interesting to know where people are attending from. And then I guess we will get started. So quick introduction. My name is Steven Ongenaat. I'm head of client services here at Nexl. My background has been in legal marketing and BD, working both as a consultant as well as in-house marketer and business developer. And now taking care of our customers here at Nexl. I am joined by Catherine Hutchinson. Today, Catherine is based in Toronto. She is a senior manager there, taking care of international client relationships at Bennett Jones, a leading Canadian firm. Prior to joining Bennett Jones, Catherine worked also for Stikeman Elliott, another household name in the Canadian legal market. And Catherine is also one of the masterminds behind the High Tide Conference, which I was very lucky to attend this year, bringing together people in marketing and BD from leading law firms around the world. Maybe she can share a bit more about that with the audience today. Also joined today by Barbara Koenen-Gering. Barbara is based in Dubai. She is currently professional services consultant here at Nexl, working alongside the team to help get our clients to success. She's also an entrepreneur, has lots of interesting side projects. She's an author and I think a true BD specialist. Prior to joining Nexl, Barbara held senior positions in large international law firms, including Al-Tamimi, where she had the pleasure of rolling out Nexl, as well as a bunch of other international law firms, I think Freshfields and some others. So welcome, Barbara and Catherine. It's really an honor to have you here. You know this topic through and through. And hopefully we'll get into an interesting discussion today on basically how to realize value from participating in these large international gatherings, such as the IBA, right? And today we'll focus on the IBA a bit, but more generally, I think the goal for today is to have a conversation around how do you approach these really large conferences, right? You have the IBA, but there's obviously INTA, there's the International Fiscal Association, you have INSOL, you have all of these major conferences. Lawyers around the world attend, and those things cost a lot of money, right? Those things don't come cheap. There's the flight, there's the hotels, but there's also the opportunity cost of just spending a lot of time meeting people over drinks or in meetings, which you cannot spend working, right? So the question really is, how can you optimize the return on that investment, really? And what are sort of the tactics involved in executing a strategy that places those conferences at the heart of your sort of international relationship management strategy? So the reason why I think this is an important topic is, unlike other sectors in legal, the referral piece is truly important, right? Because of the structure of the market, we tend to depend a lot on international referrals, particularly. Some firms up to 40 or even 60%, I heard, of revenue can come from international referrals. And the conferences like the IBA really function sort of as a global marketplace where firms can deploy these international client relationship and referral management strategies. And so we're very keen to hear a bit more about how both Catherine and Barbara have done that. And we also want to hear from you, right? There's lots of people in the room that either are responsible for those topics or have played a role attending those conferences themselves. But before we dive in, a quick couple of housekeeping items. As you will see, we're in a team session here. We have a chat and a Q&A button in the top ribbon. You can use both. You're more than welcome to ask any questions or share your observations, experiences. You can use either the chat or the Q&A. We'll try to pick up on those and try to answer them as we approach the topics throughout the conversation. Emma will help us keep track of any questions. Don't be shy. Please feel free to share as much as you like. We might not be able to, answer all of your questions, but it will be interesting to get the conversation going. Also, you will get a recording of this conversation after the session, so you will receive an email with a link to the recording after our webinar today. And with this short introduction, let's kick off. I suggest I'll hand over here to Barbara, who can start moderating a bit and maybe get a conversation going. So Barbara, the floor is yours.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for the kind introductions as well. I'm very pleased to be here with everyone today, and thanks to everyone as well for joining. And obviously, again, a special thanks to Catherine for joining, because we are definitely going to pick your brain today, Catherine, as well as Stephen's. And as Stephen and Catherine had the pleasure of joining the very last IBA in Mexico, I think it's only fair that I'm asking them a couple of questions around their experiences, not only the IBA at Mexico, but generally the IBA in principle and any other similar conferences. So we've broken this down into three sort of like core topics or subjects that we're going to discuss today. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions on the basis of these topics. So as Stephen said, do feel free to ask any questions you may have with regards to a particular topic. We will just pause there and get your questions answered. Okay, so the three key topics for today are relationship building, ROI, and pitfalls that we want to share with you to make sure that you avoid making similar mistakes. Right, so just setting the scene here for a bit. Firms typically attend the IBA, obviously with the main purpose of building strong international referral networks. Now, there is a lot of other opportunities that come with attending or organizing pieces around the IBA, but that, I think we could say, is the main purpose for most firms. Now, bringing this to the topic of relationship building, Catherine, it's been a couple of weeks since the last IBA. I'm sure you're still not completely over it, because I know how intense it is. But could you share with us, please, a little bit about your experience of how you built this international network of referrals whilst you attend and invest in conferences like the IBA?
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Stephen. I'm also going to chime in and just say I've been flicking through the names of the attendees on here and the people who've been doing the IBA longer than I have. So I'd also welcome their thoughts, especially if they disagree with me, because I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. So I'm happy to share my experiences. But I'm also happy to make this a bit of a dialogue with our audience as well. So the first IBA that I was involved in was back in 2008. So I've been doing this a fair while. And what I would sort of say from the outset is I don't think the IBA is the right conference for everybody. So I think before you decide I'm going to go to the IBA, we're going to do this, you've got to tie it back to your firm strategy. You've got to understand what your firm is looking to do in the international market, how it's looking to build and grow. Is this the right audience for you? And you can look at, the delegates that attend, the countries that attend, but also the practice areas of people who attend. It does sort of lean very heavily to the big corporate practice and litigation. So if you're a firm that focuses in more of a niche sector, you may find that you're better off going to an industry conference or something that a bar organises specifically to you. So I think that, this sort of step one is this the right conference for your firm? And the planning that then has to drive from that all links back to your strategy. So as you're sitting and saying, right, we want to increase international referrals, that's great, but you've got to be a lot more specific than that. You've got to understand where your work currently comes from, who you've got relationships with. You've got to understand what your firm's sweet spot is. So not every country, not every type of law firm is going to be in a position to send you work, and vice versa. We're not going to be the right firm to send, certain firms files either. So there needs to be a lot of planning and preparation that goes into an IBA in terms of what firms you want to meet with, what practitioners from your own firm you're going to take with you. I love the lawyers I work with. I think they would be the very first people to say that it's not the right thing for all of them. Some people are much more comfortable writing scholarly articles, being on the faculty at the local law school or something like that, than they are going to a conference and networking and things like that. So making sure that you've got the right people on your team to achieve your goals. And I would say that it's really important that everyone who attends the IBA has a thorough knowledge of your firm and able to talk to all of the different practice areas. And that may involve some pretty hard work on your BD side to make sure everyone's aware of what's been going on recently in practice areas outside of their own, because they shouldn't be there for self-interest. If you start your sentences with I, me, and things like that, it's probably a good indication that that's not the right person to be representing your firm. They should be able to sell the firm as a whole, to be able to talk about all of the different practice areas, not just their own, and to approach it from that altruistic aspect rather than self-interest. So that's sort of, I guess the starting point, Barbara, that you've got to sort of have those internal discussions. You've got to do a little bit of soul searching to make sure that it is the right conference for you. And don't get me wrong, I think the IBA is fantastic, and we've seen some amazing results at both the firms that I've been at that have attended. But for those who've maybe joined this webinar who haven't attended the IBA or aren't sure if it's the right conference for them, I think that this is a great way to sort of start that conversation about whether this is the right way that you should be doing business development for your firm.
This is very useful. Thank you, Catherine. And we are going to discuss a couple of items that you've mentioned a little bit later on. So one of them is obviously ROI. You've dropped it there already. And also we are sort of like having a reverse approach to this webinar, because usually you would start with planning and then you go to the event and then what's, going to follow up afterwards. Now we've taken a different stance that we wanted to start with the ROI, given that we've just, gone past one IBA in Mexico. We will address the planning phase a little bit at the end of the webinar to get ready for Toronto next year. Thank you so much for that. So Stephen, you are obviously head of client services at Nexl, so a master in international relationships, I would say. What tips and advice can you give the audience, and particularly on your recent experience having attended the IBA, and making sure that you can tap into all the various relationships that you've set out will be important to you?
Right. So that takes us all the way right back to the planning piece, I think. But it all, I think, starts with, do you know what you want to get out of the IBA, as Catherine mentioned? But then also, do you know what's actually going on within your different practice groups? Do you know who we know within certain organizations, right? So doing that relationship mapping, I think, is a crucial part, not only to help you navigate the meetings that you have planned, but also the more kind of ad hoc encounters that are part of the overall IBA experience as well. So being able to go in with a plan, but then also with a roadmap in terms of the relationship and the relationship capital that you have as a firm, not just as an individual. I think that's absolutely a crucial ingredient for success. And I wanted to pick up on something Catherine mentioned, because now I'm obviously here at Nexl, but I have had my years in law firms as well. And I think there's this perennial discussion around who should be going, right? Who has the right credentials to claim a often very coveted spot on the IBA delegation of a firm. And I think that's where a lot of firms have sometimes gotten stuck a bit in a team that goes year after year after year. And the argument then is often made, well, we've built all of these relationships. It's up to us. We know people best. So, it's obvious that we should go again. And I think the ability to push back a bit as, either head of international referral relationships or client relationships, or within BD, to say, like, look, if these are our goals and these are the conversations and the organizations we'd like to meet, then let's select the people in function of their ability to drive those goals forward. And that's something that definitely is a conversation worth having. So not only getting the roadmap, but also facilitating that internal conversation around how can we have a more almost rational, data-driven approach to who should attend. That is, I think, key as well.
Okay, well, this is all great and on paper. I think in theory, wonderful, especially on the planning side. I think we can all do that. But now we're back. Right, we've attended the IBA in Mexico. Catherine, we've had this discussion around the follow-ups, particularly with your lawyers. Everyone's had their meetings. You've taken notes. Where do these notes go? What are we going to do with this wonderful information that we've collated throughout this very intense period of time? What's next?
Barbara, you're making massive assumptions there that people are giving the notes to me.
Don't they?
Fortunately, my team do, but it's taken a little trial and error to work out the best method for getting that information. If you haven't attended the IBA before, it is overwhelming. There is so much going on during the week. And I think the temptation is to treat it like you would, a normal work week. You have a meeting on a Monday afternoon. Of course, you remember what you said on Wednesday. Why wouldn't you? But when you're sitting in back-to-back meetings, you've got late nights with cocktail receptions, you're up early for firm breakfasts, it can all merge into one. So what I've worked with lawyers on over the years is making sure that they keep contemporaneous notes. So they take notes during the meeting, they write them up as soon as they possibly can, no later than the plane ride home, I would say, to make sure that you're capturing that information. What I've done at both the firms I've worked with is to try what methods work for different people. Some people are very much the pen and paper, so I actually have little note sheets with prompts on that they can fill in during the meetings. But over the years, I found more people prefer electronic, so there's an electronic version of that sheet that they can fill in on their phone, on their laptop, whatever works for them, and they just email that over to me. I know Barbara doesn't want me to, but I'm going to go back to that planning phase. If you know who you're going to be meeting, if you're doing, 40, 50 firm meetings during the week, if you can do some pre-preparation of who's going to be in those meetings and add them into your CRM before you even go to IBA, that is going to save you a lot of work on the back end, because entering business cards, putting all that information into your CRM is something that is quite easy to ignore and not quite get round to. And a lawyer who I worked with some years ago, who shall remain nameless, once very proudly showed me his drawer of his business cards that he collected at all of the IBA meetings. It's not Pokemon. You're not there to collect cards. You actually need to do something with that information. So by having that sort of stacked up, you know who you're going to be meeting with, having that in your system ahead of time will just make it easier to do that follow-up piece. So back to what I do with them when I get them, and very, very happy to say that all of my lawyers submitted all of their meeting notes. They're all in our CRM. They have all been uploaded into a trip report for all of the partners to see on our internal website, because once you've got the information, it's really important that you disseminate that information, because otherwise there's not a lot of point. You know, if you're not sharing that information in a large firm, you're missing opportunities. So when we fill out our forms, we ask the lawyers, what did you talk about? What practice areas were of interest? You know, what are the opportunities for work? Maybe they're in a jurisdiction that is seeing more opportunities with Canada because of a change in legislation or a change in industry focus, such as rare earth minerals or things like that. So making sure that we've got all of those notes allows us to identify opportunities, which will flesh out, and they can be, you know, send somebody information on the practice, or make an introduction to somebody who wasn't at the conference, but who is in that firm's sweet spot for their clients. I would say that the more information they can give me, the more that we can, you know, build those relationships. Also, we identify where they might be next. So we've just had the IBA Women Lawyers Conference in Toronto. So one of the takeaways that I had from those meeting notes is, oh, a few of our partners are going to be in Toronto next month for the Women Lawyers Conference. Wouldn't it be great to set up a meeting? So having that information on a timely basis and actually doing something with it is pretty important. It's pretty low tech, I will say. I'm talking about a Word document here. This isn't some, you know, wonderful app that we've developed or anything like that. This is old school, and, you know, that's going to be available to everybody on this call. Sharing on the intranet, again, it's pretty low tech, but I know that there are, you know, systems, CRMs, things like that, that can make this a little more streamlined, a little easier to share that information. And I don't think it matters necessarily how you do it, as long as you do it.
Yeah, and that leads obviously to long task lists for yourself and the wider business development team, I can imagine. Because, and that's great, obviously, because, you know, you make such a huge investment into the IBA. There is potentially an expected, we'll talk about this in a minute, outcome from the IBA. And then you create these sort of like notes, obviously, that will translate into proper action that needs to happen from your end or the lawyer's end. And how do you make sure, and I just wanted to touch base between you and Stephen, based on your experience, what is the role of BD versus the role of your lawyers in this process? Because there is a intersection between, you know, some admin related work versus actual reaching out to the clients. I am sure you're not just going to sit back, put everything in the system, and then that's it. There's a lot of, you know, tasks and action that needs to happen here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm delighted to see so many BD people on this call. When I started going to the IBA, we were pretty few and far between. And the ones that I did sort of bump into during the conference were usually there to take notes in meetings and to make sure lawyers got to appointments. It's a massive missed opportunity for firms if that's how they're using their business development people. We are the cheapest resource that exists because we're not billable. We're not losing billable hours by being at the conference. So having us out, you know, we know more about the firm across the different practice areas than most of the partners. The partners will know their area incredibly well, but they may find it harder to talk about different offices, different countries, different practices, whereas we're in that stuff day in and day out. It's also easier for us to sell the firm because we're not selling ourselves. We're not talking about me and I, and a lot of lawyers are very reluctant to come across as too salesy. But when I say, oh, I've got an amazing partner in that practice area, or you must meet this person, they're just fantastic. It's much easier for me to do that as somebody who doesn't practice law. Does that sort of answer the role? I mean, I think there is an administrative component, but I think the missed opportunity, or at least originally there was a missed opportunity. We had 116 people, I think it was, at the High Tide conference at the IBA from, I think, 27 different countries. So there are definitely a lot more BD people now attending the IBA conference and being allowed out to develop their own networks. I'm not sure about you, Barbara, when you were in your firm, and Stephen, but I get a lot of phone calls from our partners saying, oh, who do we know in this particular country? We've got a client who needs somebody to do a due diligence search, or we need somebody to help with a litigation matter. So us having our own networks is another sort of tool in that toolkit for the firms to develop those relationships and say, yes, I know exactly who the right person is for our client.
I think that's absolutely right. Also, the ability for BD folks to leverage their own understanding of the organizations and the law firms the firm works with, right? That is something that we often know much better from a firm-wide perspective than the individual attorneys attending the IBA. So really putting your clients or the referral partners at the heart of the conversation and facilitating the conversation with knowledge about their relationships and their focus is I think, a huge game changers. And there's a couple of people here in the meeting that increasingly play that client-facing role. I think that that's a clear trend that is happening as we speak. Yes, we're there to facilitate and to coordinate, but as you mentioned, Catherine, the networks that we can build out, whether with other BD specialists or with other stakeholders across our referral partners, that is a hugely important task people increasingly take on. And so one thing I wanted to get back to as well, I fully agree with Catherine on the need to log the information after your meetings as soon as possible. I had it on my list, Barbara. I know you're going to ask us about the pitfalls, but that was actually one of the things that I was so surprised about, the sheer number of meetings and conversations you have. It's impossible to keep it in your mind intact. It's information that disappears. And if you don't write it down, or you speak it into your phone, or you log it as an activity on your CRM application, it just disappears. So I would definitely emphasize that point about logging the information as soon as you can.
I fully echo that. And it's really good to see that the roles of business development and marketing managers are being taken so seriously across firms, that they actually are given the opportunity to participate in conferences like the IBA. I fully agree, Catherine, that it has such a major impact on firms as well. If BD people start to build their own networks as well, in that sense, they become a massively valuable source of knowledge. And sometimes, even connecting peer-to-peer with other business development managers across different firms, we speak in the same language as well, and it just is easy to connect. And we can then therefore, through those connections, basically ensure that our partners meet the partners at your firm and other firms alike, wherever they need help across the pond, effectively. So this is really great. Now, we've got a lot of investment into the IBA, because you sent, I don't know, Catherine, how many partners were attending for your firm this year?
I mean, it varies for us year to year. I think this year we had 9 or 10 who were attending.
So that's 9 times 8 hours a day of billable time, times so many days out for the conference. And then your flights and hotels, you've got your cocktail reception, everything around it is like really a big, budget cost for the firm. So how do we ensure that we actually make a return on this investment? Now, I know this is hard to measure usually, but in our pre-discussion, I think you've phrased it really well. There is a difference between soft and hard ROI, and I wanted to ask you to explain that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what I would call the split between business development and between marketing and brand. So it's relatively hard to demonstrate a quantifiable ROI for brand. Being known as a go-to firm, having a reputation for high quality, having practitioners who are experts in their field, that all speaks to your brand. It is not, oh, well, we did this brand exercise and we got this work. It's not a conversation that happens in most firms, but it's not something that you should discount either. I think that a firm's position in their market, whether they are top of mind, whether they are the firm that people think of when they think of a Canadian law firm, is an important piece to that. And it will build into that more demonstrable return on investment through files referred, revenue in time, but it's much stickier. It's much harder to be able to draw that straight line. The hard ROI is being able to say, we did this business development activity, we got this work and this amount of money from it. As most people on this call will know, if only it were that simple, I would love to be able to draw a lovely straight line, did this, got this, fodder at demonstrandum. Yeah. But unfortunately, that's not how most law firm relationships work. It's more of a spider's web. So what it's important to do is to make sure that you know as a firm how you have developed a relationship with another law firm, how you have got broad and deep connections at that law firm. And then you can build that spider's web. So, for example, if I meet a firm for the very first time at the IBA, nobody in our firm is listed as knowing them. They're not in our CRM. And we get a file a week later. I would say that is a pretty lovely straight line. We attended the IBA and met with them. We got a piece of work. That has happened for me fewer than 5 times at the IBA conference. I do have a lovely story about being on a dance floor, and a chap that I had met the night before came over to me and said, "You're Canadian, right?" And as most people can tell from my accent, sort of is the answer. I've been in Canada for 20 years. The accent is very British. And he said, one of my partners, he was a partner himself, one of my partners needs a Canadian tax lawyer. Can you help? And I ended up going into a service elevator area, picking up my phone. Because of the time difference, I could call one of our tax partners in Canada and connect them in real time to that person who needed the Canadian tax advice. That does not happen very often. I really wish it did, but those are your straight lines. Everything else is far more complex. So you may have gone to the IBA conference and had a meeting and followed up. You may have made an introduction. They may have gone to another conference and met different people. They may have attended one of our webinars. They may be getting one of our economic outlooks. They may be, all of these things fit together. So it's very, very hard for me to say, well, we absolutely need to go to the IBA to get this work, when there's so many other pieces in that. But what you can show is patterns. What you can show is that increased face-to-face time with people, increased sharing of information about your firm does lead to increased revenue. But I won't lie, it can be quite messy. But I will say that the information that you glean and asking firms, why did you send us this file? How did you make that decision? Oh, well, you said this at the IBA. That can be really useful to help demonstrate ROI, and people shouldn't shy away from those conversations as well.
Thank you. And it's useful to have that ROI conversation because, you want to go next year if it was actually beneficial, right? And sometimes we see firms actually require some sort of justification by way of, business case that needs to be presented, particularly around sort of like who would be attending and how many people. And what's the projective, and which firms are we going to meet with, etc. Now, Stephen, you obviously speak with so many different law firms across the globe. What would you say, have you sort of like seen would be their metrics that they use to effectively track ROI?
Right. Well, I'd start off by saying that we have to get out of the mindset of thinking about ROI in terms of just naked dollars, right? I think there's a lot of return that can be measured differently, that isn't necessarily revenue, or that cannot be correlated directly to specific activities. So the way I see it is, I think there's kind of three buckets of metrics that you can consider and look at. And it's kind of a spectrum from what we call leading versus lagging indicators, right? And I think some of the leading indicators, that's just doing your homework, tracking all of the meetings, tracking all of the new contacts generated, tracking all of conversations had, and making sure that there's intelligence generated from those conversations that finds its way onto some kind of institutional platform, right? Typically your CRM, obviously. So I think just being aware of those engagement metrics and being able to measure those across different types of conferences, across different approaches, different strategies and activities. I think that's an important first step, which with a decent CRM shouldn't be too hard to do. I think the second bucket of metrics has to do with opportunities, right? And there are increasingly firms that have a system or a process around identifying, managing, and then tracking opportunities, which is not just your kind of your pitch list, right, or your pitch tracker. It really speaks about can you encourage and train sometimes your attorneys to be able to identify business opportunities when they present themselves, even in the very early premature stages, right? So the ability to move from just relationships that are being nurtured to identification of business opportunities and potential matters, that I think is a very important step. And what we've seen, and I can definitely echo that from my own experience in the IBA this year, is the ability to either fast track certain opportunities you're already having, or add significant touch points with key decision makers that can push opportunities forward. I think that's something that can be measured as well, and should be considered, I think, a key metric for those types of events. Of course, you need to have a system in place. You need to be able to kind of track the velocity of your opportunities in a sense. It's not always as hard as it sounds. Again, being able to distinguish between, hey, this is an important contact, I need to nurture this relationship, versus I think there's an opportunity here for our tax attorneys to do something because I got certain buying signals from my counterparts. I think that's an important skill that people need to take to those types of conferences. And then the last bucket, I think, really are revenue metrics, but those are lagging indicators, right? Revenue or the conversion of an opportunity or a relationship into an opportunity into real revenue takes time. There are multiple touch points, the spider web Catherine referred to. There are always going to be steps that are difficult to identify or to quantify, but of course it's not impossible, right? It does make it a bit more complex. You have to marry up your relationship data with your revenue information. That information sits in different systems. So the ability to bring those two together to identify the correlation and see those patterns Catherine referred to, it's not an easy feat. And for small firms, it might be a step too far to try and do that in kind of a more scientific matter. But with the right technology these days, there's definitely ways to, you can do that. So these three buckets, engagement metrics, opportunity metrics, and revenue metrics, I think is a good lens to approach the whole ROI discussion.
And that obviously is very much around the use of data, I think, in general, making sure that you use data to make more informed decisions about what you're going to do with the IBA, during the IBA, and after the IBA. Now we can plan a lot, which we've talked about very briefly. We can have everything in place, but then still things go wrong. It just happens. A lot of firms are now, especially those who've attended the IBA for quite a couple of years, they will have become quite sophisticated in planning and organizing the IBA. But I think all of us on this call will know that some things just don't go as planned, and there's stuff that we just don't have in control, such as, for example, planning your IBA event at the wrong end of town, and then also discovering that the bridge was broken down so that people can't actually reach your venue. That's one thing that actually happened in real life. And I know, Catherine, there was like a little hiccup in Mexico with some sort of fanfare parade going through the streets, and your lawyers couldn't actually cross the street to make it to their meeting. So, Catherine, as an actual IBA veteran, she's planned for everything, but still there's things that are being thrown at us that we have no control over. Now, what would be some of the pitfalls that you want to share with the audience that are actually, let's call it maybe mistakes or things that could be improved on the next time around, that could help prevent others from making similar mistakes?
Absolutely. I think one of the ones that I'll start with, given what Stephen was just talking about, is the I of the ROI, your investment. I think one of the mistakes that firms make when they are positioning the IBA or any large international conference is to simply look at it as a conference. So what I try to explain to people who are going, my goodness, Catherine, how much are we spending on IBA? Because it's not a cheap conference. The registrations are expensive. The flights are expensive. The hotels are expensive. We get it. It's not cheap. But I don't look at it in terms of a very expensive conference. I look at it in terms of what is it saving us in terms of other initiatives. So being in Canada, I'll pick on Australia. We're not sending lawyers to Australia every month to do business development with the top firms there. We're not sitting down with their mining guys, much as we would love to. There's a lot of deal flow between Canada and Australia, but it's a very expensive trip. It's a very long time to get to there from Canada. But at the IBA, I can meet 5 or 6 Australian firms in a morning if that's what I want to do. So looking at it as an opportunity to meet 40 or 50 different firms from, 20 different countries is actually saving you those business development trips to those individual countries. You're also meeting with people who have an international focus. So if you do go and meet firms elsewhere in their home cities, you may not be meeting the right people who are in that international workspace that are in a position to send work. Whereas the people that attend the IBA are typically the decision makers, the people who decide where to refer work to as well. So that's sort of the I, and I would say that I guess mistake number one is just thinking of it as an expensive conference. It's actually, doing business development with 40 or 50 different firms from all of these different countries in a very economical, both in time and investment way. The logistics, you've touched on that, Barbara. I won't name names, but the people that couldn't get to the meeting, I actually picked up the phone to somebody sitting in our audience today and said, oh my God, I am so sorry. They are literally across the road and the police won't let them get to you. Yes, even the best laid plans can go astray. But I would say as much planning as you can do on the front end will help mitigate some of that. So I felt like I knew Mexico City inside and out in terms of which roads were where, which hotels were where the restaurants were. So, I kind of, when I got to Polanco and got to my hotel, I was like, oh yeah, this feels actually quite familiar. I know just down there is the Intercontinental, just over there is the Hyatt. I know what I'm doing. So planning, making sure that you've put as much preparation in as possible to make people feel comfortable, and briefing your lawyers, making sure they know where things are, how long it's going to take to get between things. Our Mexican colleagues, again, I can see quite a few of them in our audience today, were really kind and shared a lot of information in our WhatsApp group of BD people about, hey, traffic's going to be really bad. I don't think any of us maybe took it as seriously as we should have done, but by the second day we did. So we knew to share that information with our lawyers. You need to allow more time. And then I would say we're all in the same boat. So when I called the BD person at the meeting that we missed, and I said, I'm so sorry. It's okay. These things happen. So, being accommodating, understanding, and finding a time to connect those lawyers later in the week is just, again, one of those benefits of having that deep network. And talking of networks, I know that at some conferences in some parts of the world, things have gone wrong. People's equipment hasn't shown up, or people have arrived without business cards, and being able to call each other and saying, hey, does anyone know where there's a 24-hour Kinko's that we can get cards printed? Or, hey, does anyone have a spare Dewberry thingamy that we can use? Is, again, building those relationships, being able to call upon each other for help when things go wrong is one of the things I love most about our community, to be honest.
The strength of the network once more. So Stephen, when you go next year, what would you do differently?
I think you really, in those conferences, you have to live in the now. It's crazy, but on many of the breakfast meetings and the seminars and all of the sessions that I've attended, I saw so many lawyers just doing work, and they travel all the way there, they attend the meetings, and they're just completely absorbed by what's on their phone or on their laptop and doing work. And I must admit that I even got carried away sometimes as well. I was like, no, there'll be time to do the work when you get back from this, but now focus on the now and leverage the moments that you have to meet new people, to engage in conversations. So that's one. I think another one that really stood out for me is the kind of don't go at it alone theme, right? Especially when you go to large gatherings. I was, for instance, at a party at the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. It's massive. There were like 2,000 people there. Of course, I knew a lot of people, but it's such a large crowd to navigate. And if you have to do that on your own, it's really hard. So what happened to me there, kind of haphazardly, was I met a CEO of an important media company who is known by pretty much everyone there, and I basically had like a super connector next to me, right? So all of the people just flocked to him and were then introduced to me. So try to identify people that know the space or the crowd you are at really well, and leverage the friendships and the goodwill that you have with some of these super connectors, as I call them, to just get more out of the events you attend to. And kind of lingering on the party theme, I also do think there's a risk in getting carried away and just think it's a big party, right? I think there's a moment to relax and to enjoy. But yeah, you have to always keep in mind that having fun is not the end goal. It should be part of what you do, but yeah, don't get carried away by the party atmosphere, because it is pretty festive, and I like you. There's a lot of adventure in the IBA, but stick with the plan.
I think a work hard, play hard attitude is important for IBA.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very social. And for those who are traveling sort of like to different time zones, it's hard to keep track with your actual work. So you find yourself attending a party, then actually having 2 hours sleep to catch up with some work and then get back to it. So it is very intense. So I think also watching your own well-being is really important to make sure that you can actually flourish throughout the whole conference. Now, speaking of sort of like everything IBA, we've been there, we've done that. Now, the next one is coming up already. I think we're starting to think about it. I've heard from you, Catherine, that some firms are starting to book hotels and venues and everything else. And it's, actually just literally within 1 year's time from now. Also, Catherine, I'm sure you don't really like me telling you, or telling the audience, Catherine, as you've heard, is obviously based in Toronto. Now, where is the next IBA going to be in Toronto? And one of the things that I think relate back to, oh, there you go, relate back to my pitfall, as I mentioned, potentially booking into the wrong end of town, wrong venue, not knowing exactly where you needed to go. It is a wise recommendation to reach out to people who are on the ground and who know the place really well. As Catherine said, it's a very friendly network of people who all want to help each other out. So I'm not volunteering for you, Catherine, definitely not. But yeah, it is in Toronto next year. So just saying. So what's next can you share a little bit more about what's coming up in Toronto, all the exciting stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, so I appreciate you not volunteering me, but I will volunteer myself because it's what I do, and I think it's important that we support one another. So if anyone does have questions as they're planning for next year's IBA, please do drop me a note, and happy to have a chat. I think, with the IBA being in Toronto, we obviously have started our planning very early, but I do see firms starting their planning earlier and earlier each conference. Securing hotel rooms at a lower rate, and even just getting all of your people into the same hotel becomes more and more difficult. Getting venues for cocktails becomes more and more competitive as I see more events on the calendar every year. And I think Toronto is probably going to, continue that trend from what I'm hearing in the market. The good news is Toronto financial district is very, very compact. Nothing is really more than a 10-minute walk away. The conference center is right here downtown, as are, multiple, good quality hotels, tons of great restaurants, bars. So I do think that some of the traffic and logistical problems will be a lot easier in Toronto. I think that there will be quite a large attendance. The IBA have told me that they are expecting really good numbers from Toronto from what they're hearing. So I think planning early, making sure that you select something in that sort of downtown financial area is important. Obviously, Toronto is a huge city. We've got plenty of hotels in Midtown and out in the east and west end of the city. They would not be my recommendation. There are some lovely, lovely properties, fabulous restaurants, but I think when it comes to IBA, proximity is really important for that conference and your planning and making sure people don't get stuck on the wrong side of a bridge.
Thank you. I was just about to ask, any bridges we should avoid?
No, there's an island, so I don't recommend that you look at the island as a venue because you are going to have to deal with ferries. But yeah, I think if you stick in that sort of area around the convention centre, you'll find things relatively straightforward to get around to. And then planning for the weather. Unfortunately, November in Toronto is not super great. I don't know if you can see outside, but it's pretty grey and rainy outside right now. And we're just about the same week that the conference will be. So making sure that you've got some decent shoes and probably an umbrella is a good idea. I'm going to touch all the wood I can to say I don't think we will have any major snowstorms. It would be very unusual to get a problem with that as early as that in the winter season.
That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing. So, Stephen, this is actually very exciting because I saw a comment in the chat about, is there going to be some Nexl training on this call? So whilst this is not like a complete training session, we did actually wanted to share a little tool that we have developed, particularly for the IBA, which is, in my experience, actually super, super helpful. So, Stephen, take it away.
All right, thank you, Barbara. And it's a good way to plug something. We'll keep it really short. This is obviously not a formal training. People who are interested to do a deeper dive, please feel free to reach out to us, and we would be more than happy to set it up for you. But basically what we have at Nexl is our no data entry CRM system that captures all of your contacts and relationships automatically. You can see here Catherine on top of my list because we had recent conversations. I have all her contact details automatically enriched, and I also have the relationship information that allows me to kind of to understand how we as a business are connected to Catherine and indeed to the organization as a whole, right? I can click through and I would have company insights that allow me to understand how we've engaged. There's a lot of information that's added automatically. Based on kind of that backbone of contact details and relationship insights, we have certain workspaces that allow us to build almost initiative-specific workspaces where you can come together as a team. So it's not just the BD or the marketing people that are running this. You can invite your lawyers to this workspace and really have a joined up approach to everything as it relates to the IBA in this instance, right? And once you've built out all of the components, as you can see here, it can contain opportunities, documents, lists of people, lists of firms that you want to meet, lists of activities that you've engaged in. Once you've built out like a blueprint for how you approach these international conferences, you can then kind of templatize that. And, for the next year in Toronto, we can just clone our workspace and we would have kind of our process baked into that workspace, right? And that obviously creates a lot of efficiencies. I won't be able to go through all of the elements in this workspace now, but we talked a bit around KPIs and collaboration. In Nexl, you can set certain objectives that can be updated to see how you've actually tracked towards your objectives. You can have built-in collaboration and commenting on all of these pages and objectives and lists. It comes with that built-in opportunity tracker. I created this little example here for Robin. If you're still on the call, I used you as our guinea pig here. But so the ability to quickly move from the meetings you're having to potential opportunities that you need to work on after the conference as a follow-up, I think that's kind of a key component of the way we do this. And we, I think, insisted a couple of times on the planning that needs to go into preparing for a conference like the IBA. And again, in Nexl, because we automatically track all of your engagement, it becomes very easy for us to jump in and look at what's actually going on, who's talking to whom, who do we know there, who are the people we most recently engaged with, are there certain people that we need to reach out to check in who's actually attending next year in Toronto. All of that becomes easier when the data is already in there, right? So I still see firms using spreadsheets to manage all of that. I think that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. So in these lists, we're able to, create custom columns to track whether requests have been sent out, whether the meeting's already confirmed. Once these meetings are confirmed and they're on the system, it becomes easy to then not only keep track of who met with whom, but leave those comments and notes for your colleagues so that you develop that relationship and that client intelligence that can help you strengthen those relationships and, in the end, expand or generate new revenue. So I'll stick to this because I see that we're almost at time, Barbara, and I do want to keep 2 minutes for maybe a last question. And then to have us read out.
Yes, sounds good. So we're taking questions from our guests today. Does anyone want to put a question in the chat?
Barbara, there was a question that came in earlier from Ben around proving ROI. What KPIs are most important when it comes to proving ROI and the IBA?
Okay. Does either Catherine or Stephen want to speak to this?
Sure. I will come down and say revenue. I think that is the bottom line for most law firms. Being able to demonstrate an increase in revenue is what's going to make it much easier for you to get buy-in for the IBA. It's not to say the others aren't important and helping you build out a picture, but I do think it probably boils down to the dollars.
At the end of the day, money has to be made. That's just the reality. So
maybe just
I
to
would
add on to
absolutely
that,
agree with that.
to wrap it up, I think what firms should really be focusing on is referral tracking as well, right? I see a lot of firms struggling with that. Revenue is a big beast, but if you can narrow it down to international referral tracking, both inbound and outbound, I think you have that additional layer of or an additional perspective on the return on investment, and especially for the inbound referrals that can be quantified. Outbound referral tracking is, I think, just as important for your international strategy. I think doing that will provide you KPIs that can drive your strategy forward as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as there is monetary value attached to it, I think it is easier to track the significance of those referrals as well.
Absolutely.
I think there was another question I saw. How do you communicate your IBA strategy or approach internally or firm-wide so that everyone is aware? It's a very good question. So, Catherine, would you like to shed your light on this one?
I think sharing data and sharing success stories is a way that resonates. I think there's a lot of things, a lot of initiatives going on in the firm. Whilst it certainly feels like the IBA might be the only thing on my plate at times, there's all kinds of things. So I think sharing a complete picture and how IBA ties into that picture is probably the most effective way of communicating that. Being able to make introductions once you're back in the office, obviously if you're only taking a small number of partners with you to the conference, making others feel that they are a part of it, that they see the benefit from their own point of view, as well as those who happen to be at the conference. Really sort of leaning into that collaboration aspect that firms should be working towards.
I agree. I think also in the reporting, it's, I think, much better to have a segmented reporting approach where you only deliver the information that is relevant to a specific practice group, for instance, rather than just having like the IBA report with all of the data in there. It can be too much, and people don't have time to go through every nugget of information that's in there. So just kind of split that up and then deliver the information that's relevant to the different teams. I think that's something that worked for me, at least in the past. So not just have one single IBA report, but focus and tailor it to the needs of the specific teams within the firm.
Yeah, we also deliver it on a firm basis. So for a particular law firm, we'll be able to say, here's the information on the firm, including that IBA component, if other people are going to be meeting with them or they're going to be coming into our office. I love Robin's comment. Know that the IBA is a marathon, not a sprint, and wear flat shoes is my probably top tip for the IBA.
Absolutely. I see that we are at time. I just wanted to thank you, Catherine, for your contribution today. It's been really fantastic to have your experience shared with the audience. And I'm incredibly grateful for giving your time to us today. So thank you very much. And obviously, I wish you the best of luck with planning for Toronto, because I know it's already started. But also with, I'm sure, the sheer amount of emails that will be coming your way with people asking for help and support, directions, and whatever and whatnot. So thank you very much. And Stephen, obviously, thank you for sharing your experience. You've spoken to so many different law firms, so it's been incredibly valuable to get your views on how this works across the globe effectively. And then lastly, thank you very much to the audience for listening in today. If there's any questions that you may have afterwards, you can always reach out to Emma and she will probably share them with us, so we can get back to you on those. And then finally, Emma, this wouldn't have been made possible without your support. So thank you so much for your help behind the scenes. We're incredibly grateful. So thank you, everyone. And yeah, we'll see you definitely at the IBA in Toronto.
you.